think it was exactly 2 weeks ago, I was on Aldersgate Street in London, and Yvonne and I were on the hunt for the little plaque that marks the place where John Wesley had his heartwarming experience. We finally did find it. But I just mentioned that to remind you that this event today, this annual conference, is part of the Methodist tradition. Because when John Wesley was organizing these bands of fervent renewal agents within the Church of England, he decided it was a good idea to get together once a year. And they called that the yearly get-together. No, they called it the annual conference. También quisiera extender una cordial bienvenida a los hermanos que nos acompañan, que hablan el idioma del cielo, que Dios lo bendiga, que se sienten en casa. And I would do that in French too, but I don't speak French. So we'll have several opportunities to hear from Superintendent Pam Braman during these days together, and this is the first of those. So Pam, Dr. Pam, it's a privilege for me to invite you to share with us this afternoon.
Let me pray. Lord Jesus, as we look at this theme of faith, I pray we would be attentive to your spirit, that we would be attentive to your voice, and that when we hear you call, we would step out. We would respond to your voice. We would step out into new territory, and we would see you at work in new and fresh ways. In Jesus' name, amen. 21 years ago, I was part of a young Christian leader development program. I guess since it was 20 years ago, I'm not young anymore. As part of that program, we participated in an outdoor adventure experience. We were broken into groups, and my group got to go rappelling. Rappelling is that thing where you stand on the edge of a cliff and with a safety harness and a rope around you, and you go backwards over the cliff, and with a rope, you let yourself down. And when you do it well, you push off the cliff, and you float down a few yards, and before you come back to the cliff, and then you bounce off again. And when it's done well, it has this beautiful sort of ballet quality, boing, boing, boing. That's what they show in the movies. They took our group to the top of a 130-foot cliff, so size of a 13-story building. And I should tell you, I don't like heights. In fact, thinking about it now, all these years later, butterflies in my stomach. But I was determined at that point, I was going to do this. I was going to conquer my fears. And so I leaned back over that cliff, just like I had been taught. But rather than the beautiful boing, boing, boing down the cliff, I began to shuffle down the cliff. I'd let about 3 inches of rope out, and then I'd move one foot a little. And then I'd let 3 more inches out, and I'd move the other foot. This was terrifying and exhausting. And when I felt like I had been doing this so long that I had to almost be there, I did something really stupid. I looked down. And 2 things happened simultaneously. First, the height terrified me. And second, I realized I was less than halfway. So I froze, stuck to that place on the mountain. Have you ever been stuck? Where are you stuck now? Within the next few weeks, I will have visited all 60 of our churches on a Sunday morning. I have 3 left. And as I travel the conference and visit our churches, I continue to ask the Lord to give me eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to understand what He is doing, and to help me see what it will take for all of our Genesis churches to be fruitful. Last year at annual conference, I talked about our need for hope. And this year, I want to focus on our need for faith. My prayer is that you will leave conference tomorrow with ideas to pray through with your church leadership on steps of faith that the Lord may be inviting you to take. You got a yellow card when you came in. I hope you did. If not, pick one up later on today. But these yellow cards. And it says at the top, possible steps of faith, and then at the bottom, pray and listen for God's invitation. Carry this around with you for the next 2 days. And only write on it things that you think, ooh, maybe God's asking us to do that. You'll get ideas from the bishop speaking, from me speaking, from interviews, from workshops, from the table, at meals. But when something comes to mind and makes you think, maybe that's a step of faith for us, jot it down on your little yellow card. We're supposed to be people of faith, right? And yet too often, I feel like we have wimpified faith. Is wimpified a word? It is now, okay. But I feel like we've wimpified faith into something it was never meant to be. You know, sometimes we call people faithful when sometimes the better word for it would be stuck. You know, they're so faithful. Too often means they can't get moving. But faith takes action. Faith has feet. The list of people of faith in Hebrews 11 is filled with action. By faith, Abel brought his offering. By faith, Noah built the ark. By faith, Abraham and Sarah went. By faith, Abraham offered Isaac. By faith, Isaac blessed. By faith, Moses kept on going. By faith, the people of Israel sprinkled the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. And by faith, they marched around Jericho 7 times. By faith, Rahab welcomed the spies. Hebrews 11:33 says, by faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. That's active faith. That's active faith. In Matthew 14, Jesus is traveling with his disciples. And in Matthew 14, the story is one of the most spectacular acts of faith in my mind in the Bible. It's the story of Peter walking on the water. Today and tomorrow, I want us to take a look at this story of Peter walking on water and ask, how can we be people who are better at having an active faith? The background of this story is that the 12 have already been sent out in pairs, seeing the power of God working through them without Jesus being present. But then they visit Nazareth and discover that in Nazareth with Jesus, there's unbelief, which has resulted in Jesus not being able to do many miracles there. And then they get the news that John the Baptist has been beheaded by Herod. So in this short window of time, they have the best and the worst happen. They've seen the power of God at work through them. They have been to a town where Jesus could do little because of the lack of the faith of the people. And they've watched a friend lose his life because of his ministry. And talk about a roller coaster of emotion. So Jesus says, let's get away for a rest. But the crowds follow. Jesus responds to the crowds. He heals and he ministers and then feeds thousands, 5,000 men plus women and children. Then Jesus, concluding that he really needs time to be by himself, to pray with the Father, he sends the disciples on the boat to cross the lake. I do wonder what he said to them, catch you later? And if he said that, how did they think he was going to catch up? I don't know. Perhaps they're so exhausted they don't ask. The disciples head off in the boat, crossing a lake they know well, which means they understand how unpredictable and dangerous it can be. And in the midst of this moment of exhaustion, of grief and celebration, seeing the power of God in amazing ways, a strong wind comes from the wrong direction, and rather than resting, they have to work hard to get the boat headed in the right direction. And they are far from land. And Jesus, the calmer of the storm, is not with them. He's gone off into the hills to pray, of all things. They struggle all night. Talk about exhaustion.
And in the early morning, between 3 and 6, after a night of struggle, in the midst of the wind, when their strength is spent and they're far from land, they see something coming towards them. They conclude it's a ghost. Ah! Just wanted to wake you up. And in the midst of their screams of fear, they hear Jesus say, "Take courage! It's I! Don't be afraid!" And Peter responds in the oddest way. He says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And he does. Story of active faith. Stepping out of the boat, seeing the miraculous happen. I want us to be people who have that kind of faith, that step into unknown territory just like Peter. This afternoon, I want to ask 2 questions from this story to get us started. First, a question the bishop already mentioned. How is it with your soul? How is it with your soul? Be honest with yourself. Are you really just stuck at calling it faithful? Are you grieving? Are you celebrating? Are you exhausted? Are you amazed at how God is working in you or around you? Are you in the middle of a storm? For any of those answers, this story is for you. For any of those answers, Jesus has an invitation for you. As we gather during breaks and over meals, can we be honest with one another? Rather than saying, "Hey, how are you? I'm fine," or rather than talking about our busyness or the latest church event or the number of people who came on Easter, can we be honest with one another? And can we say, "I'm stuck," or "I'm celebrating," or "I'm exhausted," or "I'm grieving," or "I'm amazed by how God is at work," or "I'm in the middle of a storm right now." Weep with those who weep, celebrate with those who celebrate, and whether you're celebrating or weeping, this story of faith is for you. And just so you know, personally, I'm amazed at how God is at work among us, and you'll hear more about that in the next 2 days. And I'm also exhausted by preparations for an annual conference. So if you say something to me and I stare at you glass-eyed, you'll know why. So first, how is it with your soul? Grieving, celebrating, exhausted, amazed? I want you to do something. And just using 1 or 2 words, say to the person next to you, "I'm." 1 or 2 words. Go. All right, if you haven't done it, switch. Yes, that fast. All right, come on back. Come on back. So how is it? How is it with your soul? Next, the words of Jesus to the disciples were, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Now, being stuck is very different from taking courage, isn't it? Take courage, says Jesus. So second question, where do you need courage? That's a different way of asking, what do you need faith for? Jesus says, take courage. But this isn't a self-help courage. There's a reason for our courage, because once Jesus tells the disciples to take courage, his next words are, "It is I. Do not be afraid." So friends, if we have the courageous faith that the Lord calls us to, that the world desperately needs, we have to have our eyes on Jesus. Not on ourselves, not on our problems or the storms around us, not on the money that is or isn't in the checking account, not on the leaky roof, not the disgruntled church member, not the change of pension, not the lack of volunteers for children's ministry. And we're not even to have our eyes on the things we celebrate. Not the crowds at Easter, not the successful capital campaign, not the new people who are coming and serving. If we're to take courage, the kind of courage that is a part of true active faith, then our courage has got to come from Jesus. Knowing him, knowing he's trustworthy, keeping our eyes on him, listening to him for his words. And we don't do that alone either. We actually have a role to play with one another on this, because Jesus' words were to everyone in the boat. One of the reasons I chose to join a denomination after having been at a non-denominational church for 11 years was that in an independent church, when your faith and your courage is waning, there's no one from the outside to say, take courage. Look at Jesus. In telling you about my rappelling adventure, I left myself stuck halfway down the cliff. Obviously, I didn't stay there. There were moments I wanted to. But the only way I didn't was that I had friends at the bottom who were talking to me and praying for me and pointing me to Jesus and telling me I had to take another step and then another and then another, even when I didn't want to hear it. And after what seemed like an eternity, I made my way down. So my prayer for our annual conference, and by that I mean both these days when we gather, as well as other ways that we serve and meet with one another, is that together we would be people who are people of faith. People who pray for one another and point each other to Jesus. People who challenge each other out of our stuck places and tell each other to take that next step. I want our CCGs, our conference community groups, to be those kind of places. Maybe we should call them courage community groups. I want conference staff to have this role, getting you out of your stuck places. I want our one-day training event to give you courage to step out in faith. And my prayer is that by the time you leave here tomorrow, you will, with the challenge and encouragement of those around you, have taken the courage that Jesus offers. You will have ideas of possible ways to step out of your boat of safety and comfort. And you will be praying and listening for his invitation to come. And then as soon as you and your team hears that invitation from him, you'll be ready to walk on water. Take a moment and share with that same person next to you this question. In your church, where do you need courage? You may not know yet what you need courage to do, but where do you need it? Do you need a courageous vision? Do you need courage to realign ministry? Do you need courage to bring changes? Do you need courage to look at new ideas? Do you need courage to be brutally honest? Do you need courage to step into your community? Do you need courage sharing your faith? So, just one sentence. Share with the person that you just talked to, and then pray for one another. Okay? Go ahead.